Desperate aliens releasing human cryopods with shaking blue hands was the last thing Lyra expected to see when the Kaleesh Armada slaughtered her people. But with trillions of Ferengi lives hanging in the balance, there was no other option. I can't believe those damned savages destroyed our entire colony world just because we tried to sell them a few measly antimatter converters. Zog slammed his fist on the console. Thousands dead just like that. Lyra sighed, her eyes fixed on the mesmerizing swirl of hyperspace outside the viewport. The sleek Ferengi starship raced through the void, but to what end? They had no weapons, no warriors, just mountains of now useless latinum and a culture of capitalistic cunning. Fat lot of good that did against the Kaleesh's plasma cannons and battle-hardened clans. We should have seen this coming, Lyra muttered. Their so-called warriors' code and obsession with honor. Disgusting, really. Who needs principles when there's profit to be made? Zog nodded vigorously, his bulbous head bobbing. Too true, but here we are staring down the barrel of a Kaleesh invasion fleet. The Grand Nagus will have our heads if we don't find a solution, and fast. Lyra's mind raced, desperate for an answer. Then it hit her, a crazy, impossible idea from the depths of Ferengi legend. The humans, those mythical warriors of old, locked away in cryo-sleep for centuries after some cataclysmic war. If the stories were true, they had technology and tactics unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. She turned to Zog, a manic gleam in her eye. I know it sounds insane, but what if we could find them? Wake them up. Maybe they could fight the Kaleesh for us. Zog gaped at her. Are you out of your mind? Those are just stories. And even if they were real, how would we find them? And why in the name of the blessed Exchequer would they help us? Lyra smiled, a plan already forming. They'd help us because we'll hire them. Everyone has a price, Zog, even legendary warriors. And as for finding them, leave that to me. I have a feeling in some old star charts that might just lead us right to their door. She turned back to the viewport, watching the stars streak by. The fate of the Ferengi people now rested on a gamble straight out of myth and legend. The humans were their last hope. She just prayed that when they opened those cryopods, their occupants would be everything the stories promised, because if they weren't, the Ferengi were doomed. Lyra and Zog dove into the Ferengi archives with a fervor born of desperation. They pored over ancient star charts, squinting at faded coordinates and deciphering cryptic notes scrawled in the margins. Zog grumbled as he flipped through a particularly dusty tome. This is hopeless. These records are older than my great-grandfather's lobes. We'll never find anything useful in here. But Lyra refused to give up. She cross-referenced every scrap of information, searching for patterns and clues. Finally, after days of relentless research, she found it. A brief mention of a long-forgotten Ferengi outpost, hidden away on the fringes of known space. The records hinted that this outpost had once been used to store valuable assets from various races, including, tantalizingly, the humans. Lyra and Zog wasted no time in presenting their findings to the Ferengi Grand Nagus. They stood before the wizened leader, their hearts pounding as they made their case for a mission to retrieve the humans. The Nagus listened, his brow furrowed. You want me to risk resources and lives on a gamble? On a myth? He shook his head. The Ferengi do not deal in fairy tales, Lyra. We deal in cold, hard latinum. Lyra stood her ground. With all due respect, Grand Nagus, latinum will mean nothing if the Kaleesh conquer us. We have no other options. The humans may be our only hope. Zog chimed in. Think of the potential profit, Grand Nagus. If the humans are as powerful as the legends say, they could not only save us from the Kaleesh, but open up entire new markets for Ferengi business. The Nagus stroked his chin, considering. Finally he sighed. Very well, you may go on this covert mission, but be warned. If word of this gets out to the other races, the consequences will be on your heads. Lyra and Zog bowed, barely able to contain their excitement. They quickly gathered a small crew of trusted Ferengi and boarded their fastest ship, setting a course for the distant outpost. As the stars streaked by outside the viewport, Zog turned to Lyra, worry etched on his face. Do you really think the humans will help us? Why would they risk their lives for a bunch of strangers? Lyra met his gaze, her eyes shining with hope. The legends say the humans had a strong sense of justice, that they fought for what was right, no matter the cost. If that's true, they won't be able to stand by while innocent lives are threatened. Zog nodded, but the doubt lingered in his eyes. And what about the cryosleep? They've been under for centuries. What if they don't wake up, or if they do, what if they're not? Right? Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. We have to try, Zog, for the sake of our people. As the outpost's coordinates grew nearer on the navigation screen, Lyra and Zog steeled themselves for the monumental task ahead. They knew they were gambling everything on the slim hope that these mythical warriors would be their salvation. But with the fate of the Ferengi hanging in the balance, it was a risk they had to take. The Ferengi ship shuddered as it docked with the dilapidated space station. Lyra and Zog exchanged nervous glances as they prepared to disembark, unsure of what they might find within the long-abandoned outpost. As they stepped through the airlock, the first thing that struck them was the eerie stillness. The corridors stretched out before them, dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. The air was stale and musty, a testament to the centuries of neglect the station had endured. Lyra consulted her handheld device, following the faint energy signatures that hinted at the presence of the cryopods. "This way," she whispered, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. They picked their way through the debris-strewn hallways, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Suddenly, Lyra stopped short, her eyes widening. "Zog, look!" she hissed, pointing to a small alcove set into the wall. There, nestled among the shadows, was a single cryopod. But unlike the others they had expected to find, this one was separate, isolated from the main storage area. Zog frowned, his brow furrowing. Why would they keep this one apart from the others? Lyra moved closer, wiping away the layer of dust that obscured the pod's control panel. "It says here that this pod contains a human named Eric Scott, a former Special Forces operative. What does that mean?" Zog shrugged, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "I don't know, but if he was placed in cryo separately from the others, he must be important. Maybe he has information that could help us." Lyra nodded, her fingers already dancing across the control panel. "Let's wake him up and find out." With a hiss of escaping gas, the cryopod's hatch slowly opened. The human inside Eric Scott stirred groggily, his eyes fluttering open. He blinked, confusion etched across his features as he took in the sight of the two Ferengi standing before him. "What? Where am I? Who are you?" he croaked, his voice rough from centuries of disuse. Lyra stepped forward, her hands held out in a placating gesture. "Please don't be alarmed. We are Ferengi, and you are on a long-abandoned space station. You've been in cryogenic stasis for a very long time." Eric's eyes widened, disbelief and shock warring on his face. "How long?" he demanded, his gaze darting between Lyra and Zog. Zog cleared his throat. "Centuries. We don't know exactly how many, but we need your help." As Lyra and Zog began to explain the dire situation with the Kalish and their desperate need for the humans' assistance, Eric listened intently. His initial disorientation and confusion slowly gave way to a sharp, analytical focus. "These Kalish," he said, his brow furrowed. "What kind of weapons do they have? What's their typical strategy in battle?" Lyra and Zog took turns describing what they knew of the Kalish's military capabilities, their resources, and the overall strategic situation. As they spoke, they could see the gears turning in Eric's mind, his eyes taking on a calculating glint. "And what about your people?" he asked, turning his piercing gaze on the Ferengi. "What kind of assets do you have? Ships, weapons, technology?" Lyra and Zog shared a glance, a flicker of hope kindling in their chests. The way Eric was processing the information, the incisive questions he was asking, it was exactly the kind of strategic thinking they had prayed for. "We have ships," Zog said, "and some weapons, but nothing that can stand against the Kalish. That's why we need you and the other humans." Eric nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. We'll need to wake up the others, he said, already pushing himself to his feet. I have some ideas, but we'll need everyone's skills and expertise if we're going to have a chance. As they made their way towards the main cryo storage area, Eric began to outline a plan, his voice low and urgent. Lyra and Zog listened intently, their hearts pounding with a newfound sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, with the humans' help, they could save their people from the Kalish's onslaught. And as Eric spoke, his words ringing with a quiet confidence, Lyra and Zog began to believe that the legends of human ingenuity and tenacity might just be true after all. As Lyra, Zog, and Eric entered the main cryo storage chamber, a grim sight greeted them. Pod after pod lay shattered, icy mist spilling from jagged cracks. Lyra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. By the blessed exchequer, what happened here? Eric strode forward, his boots crunching on broken glass. He knelt beside a ruined pod, examining the damage with a critical eye. Centuries of neglect, he said grimly. These pods weren't designed to last this long without maintenance. Zog wrung his hands, his bulbous head drooping. Then the humans. Eric stood, his face a mask of determination. Some may have survived. We need to check each pod individually. They set to work, the Ferengi crew joining them. Pod by pod they assessed the damage, hope fading with each shattered chamber. Finally, Eric called out, "Over here, I've got a live one." Lyra and Zog rushed over as Eric carefully initiated the awakening sequence. The pod hissed open, revealing a groggy, disoriented human. Eric helped her sit up, speaking in soothing tones. "Easy there, soldier. You're safe. Welcome back." As the human, a woman with close-cropped hair and a wiry frame, regained her bearings, Eric moved on to the next viable pod. In the end, only a handful of humans could be revived, each one emerging confused and disoriented. Eric gathered the survivors, his voice ringing with authority. "Listen up. I know you're all disoriented, but we don't have time for a lengthy adjustment period. We're in the middle of a crisis, and these folks," he gestured to the Ferengi, "need our help." As he briefed the humans on the situation with the Kalish, Lyra marveled at how quickly they adapted, shaking off centuries of sleep and focusing on the task at hand. These were soldiers, specialists, problem solvers. They assessed the situation with cool efficiency, already discussing strategies and tactics. While the humans took inventory of the outpost's resources, Lyra noticed Eric pause, his eyes widening. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, reaching into a dusty crate. He pulled out a sleek, angular rifle, unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Eric turned to his fellow humans, a grin spreading across his face. "Look what we have here. Experimental pulse rifles, plasma grenades, adaptive camo suits. Looks like Christmas came early." The humans clustered around the cache of advanced weapons, their excitement palpable. They handled the gear with reverence, quickly familiarizing themselves with the unfamiliar tech. Zog sidled up to Lyra, his eyes wide. "Incredible," he whispered. "They've been asleep for centuries, but they handle those weapons like they were born to it." Lyra could only nod, awestruck by the humans' natural proficiency. As the humans continued to assess the outpost's capabilities, Eric pulled Lyra and Zog aside, his expression serious. "Listen," he said, keeping his voice low. "I won't lie to you. These weapons are a game-changer, but they're not a magic bullet. The Kalish are a warrior race, right? They live for battle." Lyra nodded. Their entire culture revolves around conquest and glory in combat. Eric rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Then we need to think outside the box. Brute force won't win this. We need to hit them where it hurts, not just physically, but psychologically." Zog frowned. "What do you mean?" "Guerrilla tactics, surgical strikes. We hit their supply lines, their communications, their leadership. We sow discord and confusion. At the same time, we start a propaganda campaign, undermining their warrior ethos. We make them question everything they believe about themselves." Lyra's eyes widened. "A war fought not just on the battlefield, but in the mind." Eric nodded. "Exactly. We chip away at their resolve bit by bit. We make them see the cost of their aggression, and when the time is right, we hit them with a diplomatic offensive. We offer them a way out, a chance to end the conflict without losing face. Zog looked uncertain. It's unconventional, to say the least. The Ferengi way is to negotiate, to find a mutually profitable solution. Eric laid a hand on Zog's shoulder. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But first we need to change the playing field. Trust me, this is the kind of asymmetric warfare that humans excel at. It's in our DNA. As Eric began to lay out the specifics of his plan, Lyra and Zog listened intently, their initial skepticism giving way to a cautious optimism. It was a daring gambit, but one that just might work. And if it did, the Ferengi would owe their survival to the ingenuity and unconventional thinking of their human saviors. As Lyra and Zog watch the events unfold from the outpost, they can't help but marvel at the humans' tenacity and resourcefulness. Despite the odds stacked against them, Eric and his team execute a series of daring raids and psychological operations, slowly eroding the Kalish's resolve. "Look at this," Lyra says, pointing to a display screen. "The humans have managed to infiltrate the Kalish's main supply line. They've destroyed critical resources without engaging in direct combat." Zog nods, his eyes wide with admiration. And here they've hijacked the Kalish's communication network, spreading misinformation and sowing discord among their ranks. It's brilliant. Week after week, the humans chip away at the Kalish's unity, exploiting their weaknesses and turning their own strengths against them. Lyra and Zog work tirelessly to support the human operatives, coordinating logistics and gathering intelligence. But as the conflict reaches a critical juncture, Lyra uncovers a shocking truth. She intercepts a secret transmission, her heart sinking as she decodes the message. "Zog, come look at this," she says, her voice trembling. "There's a faction within our own government that's been collaborating with the Kalish. They've been feeding them information, resources, all in exchange for a cut of the spoils after the Kalish win." Zog's face pales as he reads the transmission. This can't be. Our own people betraying us, betraying the humans who are fighting and dying for our survival? Lyra slumps in her chair, the weight of the revelation crushing her. All this time we thought we were fighting a united front, but the enemy was within our own ranks. With heavy hearts, Lyra and Zog call Eric back to the outpost. They break the news to him, watching as his face hardens, his faith in the Ferengi shaken to its core. "I'm sorry, Eric," Lyra says, her voice thick with emotion. "We had no idea. If you want to pull your team out, we'd understand." But Eric shakes his head, his jaw set with determination. "No, we've come too far to give up now. The fate of not just the Ferengi but the entire galaxy hangs in the balance. We finish this, no matter the cost." Lyra and Zog exchange a glance, humbled by Eric's resolve. They know that the road ahead will be even more treacherous, with enemies on all sides. But with the humans leading the charge, they allow themselves a glimmer of hope. As Eric and his team gear up for their final desperate assault on the Kalish command center, Lyra and Zog can only watch and wait, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of the sacrifices to come. "Do you think they can do it?" Zog asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra takes a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the display screens. If anyone can, it's them. The humans have already achieved the impossible. Now, we have to trust that they can do it one last time. The outpost falls silent as Eric and his team begin their infiltration, the fate of galaxies resting on their shoulders. Lyra and Zog hold their breath, knowing that the next few hours will decide the course of history. In a fierce battle that rages for hours, Eric and his comrades fight with a bravery and skill that defies belief. They penetrate deep into the heart of the Kalish command center, using their advanced weaponry and training to carve a path of destruction. But the cost is high. One by one the humans fall, giving their lives to buy their teammates a chance to push forward. Eric himself is gravely wounded, but he fights on, driven by a singular purpose. With a final heroic effort, Eric and the last of his team succeed in destroying the command center, and eliminating the Kaleesh leadership. The explosion rocks the outpost, the shockwave felt across the galaxy. In the aftermath of the battle, Lyra and Zog can only sit in stunned silence, tears streaming down their faces. They have won, but at a terrible price. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.